Good day to all of you. My name is Professor Dr. Anja Krumeyer. I'm a professor in global health. My background is in social anthropology, and based on my experience with qualitative research, I will address you today and will talk a little bit more about paradigms that are relevant for qualitative research. As you may all know by now, when you prepare a qualitative research, you are bound to do a extensive literature research first, and you do so to get a better grip on the topic of your research. You will do an open-ended data collection in qualitative research, but to structure that and to be sensitive to what kind of dimension concepts should be included in your topic, and also to have an understanding what models and what conceptual and theoretical frameworks might be relevant for your research and that help you to have an idea of all the dimensions that you should pay attention to in your study, you use that literature. However, another source of inspiration that might help you to operationalize and to have an idea on how to look at the topic of your study and what to include could also be derived from what we call paradigms. They can help you also with inspiration for how you want to operationalize your study, what kind of issues and dimensions you want to include as well. And that could be either in addition, but often also instead of your normal literature. So why do we talk about paradigms? Well, paradigms are different ways, provides us with a different way in which we can classify research traditions, qualitative and quantitative. And paradigms are about three different things. So the three things constitute a paradigm. Paradigms tell us a little bit about the assumptions that the researcher has, that is within that particular paradigm, working within that particular paradigm, that the researcher has concerning the nature of reality. I will talk a little bit about that, a bit more about that in a minute. The paradigm is also about what kind of knowledge claims does the researcher working in that paradigm is wishing to do. So what is knowledge, and what can we know, and what is knowing? What is involved in knowing? And then a third layer of the paradigm is the methodological requirements that follows from the standpoint the researcher takes with regard to the first two dimensions in the paradigm. So I'll try to explain, because this must sound totally puzzling. I will tell you a little bit more about this in a minute, but if you look at paradigms, you can roughly divide the research world into 5 different paradigms. So all research belongs to one of these paradigms. And today there are a bit more than the 5 that I will talk today, but I think those are the most relevant to talk about for now. First is the positivist, that is the oldest paradigm that we have. Then the post-positivist is a kind of a response to critique that has been formulated against the positivist paradigm. Then we have a paradigm that I call interpretivist and social constructivist. They are slightly different, but for the sake of clarity and not being too long, I will talk about them together. I'll take them together. Then we have the radical constructivist and the critical theory paradigm. But let's go back and talk about the positivist paradigm first, and I prepared a beautiful word of art for you to help you understand. Now, as I said, there's 3 layers in each paradigm. What do we think about reality? What do we think about knowledge? And what do we think about methodology? In the positivist paradigm, the assumption about reality is quite straightforward. We do believe that outside of us, in the world, we see nature. Nature is run by laws of nature, by all kinds of principles. We look around and we see nature happening. And when we look at it as a normal individual, we do not have the means or the tools to understand exactly what's going on about it. So we look at nature with our cultural glasses, with our emotional glasses, and we have our own understanding of what nature is about. And if you see the glasses that we as normal individuals have, our culture, our emotions, our personality, makes us interpret what we see in a particular way. And that leads to what we call a lay understanding. You see that on the right of the picture. A lay understanding of nature. We see it through the glasses. Without the glasses, we wouldn't see or understand anything. And lay understanding is based off trial and error. It's about common sense. It is colored by our emotions, by our experiences, the way, and it is a personal, cultural interpretation of what we see going on in the world outside of us. On the other hand, you see the science on the other side, and the science tries to put off the glasses and tries to look at reality as it really is, uncolored, unbiased, not colored by personal or cultural histories or experiences, but tries to get a grasp of reality as it really is. And you see that the understanding of the scientist is far closer to the independent reality in the center of the picture than that of the normal individual. The idea here is that scientific knowledge is by far superior to the knowledge of the normal individual, even though that is trial and error. The scientific knowledge of the scientist, the knowledge of the scientist is exact, it's true, it's very close to nature. And you see some differences between the knowledge of the scientist and what is going on in nature, but that is because we haven't collected knowledge about the missing elements as yet. So there is still a bit of difference between what the scientist knows and what reality is really like, but that needs to be fixed by ongoing research. And to be able to see the true picture without any bias or discoloring or disfiguring, the scientist needs to follow very, very strict rules on methodology. Reality can be known, is the assumption here, if we are able to get over our subjectivity, our colors, our lenses, our ways of interpreting. And that is the task of the science, to get knowledge as real as it and as true and as real to nature as we can. The underlying idea is that this is possible and that we should strive for it and that we should adhere to very strict methodological rules. Positivism is therefore seen as a hard idea of science. It's about finding the true facts, finding the truth. And in the light of all this, qualitative research is not scientific enough, because it is about a scientist or a researcher talking to people, listening to their stories, their views on reality, and the scientist, him or herself, is trying to interpret. And it's very difficult to put off your glasses and be very objective, because you get into a kind of personal relationship. So in the positivist paradigm, qualitative research is not seen as real research. And as a consequence, in social sciences and humanities, who are really also interested in qualitative research, the positivist paradigm is actually more or less abandoned. So there might be some pockets of positivist scientists adhering to the positivist paradigm, but that is only in the very, very hardcore sciences. And then we have post-positivism. And again, I try to picture this in a work of art. You see in the center, you see a picture of nature, of reality, as it really is. The starting point here is that reality and nature, running according to laws of nature and all kind of principles of physics and chemistry and whatever, it is there, but it is so complex and so vast that it is not possible for one single scientist to really understand it all, and to be able to make some sense of this complex, chaotic reality that we try to understand but will never be able to completely understand. What we do is reduce what we see and what we know to smaller, simpler, simplified chunks of knowledge that we then call theory. So reality itself is so complex to know and understand it all that we need to talk about reality in theoretical terms by reducing it to theoretical frameworks, concepts, etc. That is what the scientist does. On the other hand, we have again the common sense knowledge, which is biased and which is, as in the positivist paradigm, not perfect, is just working in daily life. The scientist has the task to get to know as much as possible about reality, will not be able to, so will develop theoretical knowledge step by step. So the scientist is striving for perfect knowledge, but never knows whether he or she really reached that perfect knowledge. And to make sure that we progress with our knowledge, the post-positivist scientist uses the concept of falsification. So we build a theoretical framework. Based on this theoretical framework, we will formulate hypotheses, and we try all the time to falsify the hypothesis. And the less we are able to falsify our theories, the more likely they become, the more likely it becomes that they are true. However, we will never know for sure whether they are really true, because that is too vast and too complex for our brains. So we will work on building theory. By trying to falsify, we will add elements of theory, we'll add to the plausibility that what we know and what we theorize is true, but we will never be entirely there. And that is what we do, or what a post-positivist researcher has in mind when he is doing his, or that is what is underlying his practices when he is practicing science. So if you apply this to qualitative research, the idea that science and that our knowledge is never entirely perfect, and that all we can do is to create theoretical knowledge and theoretical knowledge as best as we can, and trying to perfectionalize them by constantly formulating hypotheses that we then try to falsify, this gives us room for qualitative research as well. For instance, in explorative studies, or to prepare for a more quantitative survey, in mixed methods approaches, in implementation study, in needs assessment. It is by far the most common application in qualitative research is a qualitative research that fits in the post-positivist paradigm, which says we cannot have perfect knowledge. Knowledge that we gather is imperfect. We need to strive. We have to adhere to strict methodological rules, but even if we do so, we are never sure that our knowledge is entirely perfectly true. We can only try to falsify, and the more often we cannot, the more plausible our knowledge becomes, but that leaves room for an imperfect tool, a tool that would be imperfect in the positivist paradigm, would fit better in the post-positivist paradigm because it is imperfect, but if we try to falsify and follow up by using other methods, then we can make also our qualitative research more plausible. This is the post-positivist paradigm, and that leaves room for qualitative research, and as I said, the majority of qualitative studies is falling under the post-positivist paradigm. But not all. And rooted in anthropology and sociology and social sciences, we also have the third paradigm that we call interpretivism, and as I said, this is also the paradigm that we can call social constructivism. Here, the assumption is not so sure that there is an independent reality. We actually do not really know whether it is there. What we do know is that we all experience an independent reality, and that we all experience it in our own way, and that we all give our own meaning to what we see, experience, and observe. The idea here is that person A, from culture A, for instance, has a cultural lens, has wearing cultural glasses that helps that person to interpret what he sees, observes, experiences in a particular way. And these glasses, you can see the tree that might be in independent reality is shaped by the glasses that person A is wearing, and becomes more according to the glasses, which are in this case square, so we get a more square tree. The glasses, you can see, is a frame of reference that a person needs to make any sense of what he sees, experiences in the world outside of him or her. And the idea here is that we need those glasses to understand and interpret reality, and that without glasses we would be entirely blind. So our glasses, our personality, our experiences, our culture, they shape the way we understand reality. They shape our interpretations of reality. And if you look at person B and person C from other cultures, with other histories, with other personal histories and experiences, they may have other types of glasses, and the person with, in this case, triangled glasses has a more triangled view on reality, and the person with round glasses has a more round view on reality. The idea here is that you cannot know anything without glasses, without frame of reference. You'll be completely blind, so you need your glasses to make any sense of reality. And you see, although we all use different glasses, we all come up with a tree, but the way we understand the tree and see the tree and interpret the tree could be square, triangled, or round, or could be according to culture A, B, or C. In this approach to reality, this paradigm, you see that knowledge is always subjective. So on the epistemological level, looking at knowledge, knowledge is always colored by the glasses, whereas on the epistemological level in the positivist and the post-positivist, epistemology always assumed that we could get either perfect knowledge in the positivist tradition, or almost perfect knowledge, or striving for perfect knowledge, which in the end is possible, about reality. So in the first two we have an independent reality, ontological level, notions about what it is possible to know and not know, which is positive in the sense that they both think it is in principle possible to know reality. Here it is impossible to know reality, because as soon as we put off our glasses to see the real reality, we are blind. We don't have a frame of reference anymore. So there is an independent reality, but what it is like and how it looks is impossible to say. You cannot distinguish which of the glasses, the square, the triangled, or the round glasses, is the true one or the best one, because they are glasses without we wouldn't see anything. So there's no way of determining which glass is the better one. And that means that according to interpretive and social constructivist studies, if you look at a particular phenomena, everybody who is involved in that phenomena, and let's take, let's say, a medical problem. If you look at a medical complaint or a disease, a stakeholder could be a scientist or a doctor, a stakeholder could be a patient, or a stakeholder could be the family of the patient, or the stakeholder could be a nurse. According to this interpretivist paradigm, each stakeholder has their own glass, and through the glass they see their own reality, and they create their own understanding of reality, which we call map of reality. And we all create our own map of reality using our own professional or cultural frames to make sense of what we see. And each stakeholder will, wearing different glasses, will do that in different ways. And based on the understanding of the phenomena, based on the way we interpret the phenomena and make sense of it using our glasses, we also come up with what would be the best way of approaching it. So if you understand, for instance, thunder and storm as an act of punishment from a god, which some Viking cultures used to do some centuries ago, then the way to respond to it is to appease that god, or to make that god calm, so he won't send thunder and storm anymore. If you see thunder and storm as electrostatic phenomena, you may build a device on the roof of your house to get the electrostatics into the earth. So you see that the scientist, or the modern scientist, understands the thunder and the storm in terms of electrostaticity, whereas the Vikings see it as an issue of a god that might be angry with them. And in this interpretive approach, it is everybody puts on glasses, understands reality in their particular way, and those glasses also give starting points for response, for building devices to get electrostaticity in the earth, or a ritual to appease Thor, as in the case with the Vikings. What it means is that all these maps, in principle, make equal sense. And the interpretivist social constructivist is relativist in the sense that it does not say anything about which of those maps is better, because it's not possible to determine which is better, because without any of those glasses we wouldn't be able to see anything, so we can't see which of the ones is the better ones and is philosophically superior, or theoretically, or in terms of knowledge superior. So all we can do is to find out what kind of ideas people have about a particular phenomenon. And I would like to try to illustrate this a little bit with an example from a study that a student of mine years ago did among the Cape Verdean community in Rotterdam. The Cape Verdean community in Rotterdam had problems, according to the mental health care services of the municipality of Rotterdam, because they either did not, they never visited mental health care facilities until it was too late, and they had to be admitted by force or medicated by force. And so the municipality wanted to know why that problem existed, and they thought it was because the Cape Verdean community did not have a clear clue on how to find the facilities and how to end up there, not only physically, where are the different, about the different addresses, but also not having an understanding of the Dutch healthcare system and how, what you needed to do to get attention for your mental health problems. And they appointed a Cape Verdean psychiatric nurse who should help the Cape Verdeans find the way to the mental health care services. So the mental health care services people interpreted or formulated or interpreted the phenomena as something as not being able to find the way. The Cape Verdean nurse, another stakeholder in this, however, she, knowing her the people from Cape Verde a bit better, she said, no, it's not a matter of not knowing where to go, but not wanting to go, because a mental health care problem, according to the Cape Verdean community, is, having a mental health care problem is a punishment by God, and therefore you did something wrong. And so showing or admitting that you had a mental health care problem showed that you had done something wrong and that God punished you. So there was a kind of a taboo among the patients, but also among their families, to openly admit that you had a mental health care problem. So people did not talk about it, did not go for help about it. And so she had the same phenomena, people not going to the mental health care services. They interpreted it in different ways. The patients had yet another idea of what the problem was. The priest, the Cape Verdeans were a Catholic community, had yet his own idea. So all stakeholders involved had different ideas about what the nature of the phenomena was that they were observing and experiencing. And by talking and by interpreting and by finding out what maps of and for reality each of those stakeholders had, the students found out that these maps differed, and she organized a dialogue about why and in what ways these maps differed among the different stakeholders to see if they could come up with a common kind of interpretation and a kind of common response to the problem. A little bit of a different example is the example of another student of mine who studied who wanted to determine what defined the success of a new surgical procedure for spasticity. Spasticity in this case was about patients who could not control the movements of their arms and would have all kind of wild movements with a wild angle, and were not able to use the arms in any functional way. The procedure was to lessen the angle and to diminish the number of movements, and for the surgeon, being able to diminish the number of movements was a success. So he defined the success in terms of the angle of the movement and the frequency of the movements. When my student spoke to an ergotherapist, he said, well, I don't care much about movement. What I care about is whether these people are going to be able to peel potatoes, prepare a breakfast, and brush their teeth after the new surgery. So he linked it to everyday functionalities. And for him, the success would be if the functionalities would be improved. For the patient, it was again a different story. The patient interpreted success as something that would make him being able to move around in social circles without feeling embarrassed. And so he had, or she had, a very different idea again about what the phenomena meant to them, but also what would be a successful response. Map of and for reality, differing per stakeholder, and therefore interesting to see, and the focus of study of interpretivist and social constructivist people, researchers, trying to find out what different maps of reality and for reality are, and see if we can find some common ground. But again, the scientific map in this approach is not superior, it's just one of the many maps, and should be participating in the dialogue on an equal level as the other stakeholders, in that sense, relativist. And then the radical constructivist is yet a different approach. It is not social constructivist, but radical constructivist. And here the idea is there might be an independent world, an independent reality. It's very likely that there is. Why wouldn't there be? But we have no idea what the elements of that independent reality are. Yet we must have some knowledge about it, because we are able to build things and to acquire knowledge. We can build churches, we can build computers, we can fly to the moon. But it means, but what kind of elements of reality there are, how they really work, is really not, you are not able to know that without any glasses. So what you do is, based on trial and error in this paradigm, you try to understand reality, you get some understanding of it, and you work with that kind of reality, and you build a house. And if you look at the two people on both sides of this reality, one uses elements of an independent reality to build a tree and a house and a sun, and the other one uses elements of reality to build a church. They both are based on true reality, but what we pick out of reality leads to completely different worlds, different ideas, different categories. So person A creates solid facts, constructs, that's hence the term constructivism, constructs solid facts, builds and organizes a world around it that then starts to function. But person B, also looking at an independent reality, picks out other solid facts and builds another reality. And both are working for person A and for person B. Person B in this case might be a scientist, person A might also be a scientist from a different discipline, or they could be a scientist and an ordinary person, but what they do is both they pick out based on experience, based on observations, based on structured or not structured, they create a reality, picking elements, selecting elements that work, that must work because they seem to link in some way to an independent reality, and they seem to pick and to be able to pick out elements of this independent reality that works for them, but they do so in different things. They have different picked different elements, and it means that they build different facts and different worlds and different realities, but both are rooted in an independent reality. And qualitative research here is to understand the reasoning and the trajectory from picking independent facts till organizing them, putting them in a reality, organizing a reality around them, and that makes us understand how the world works. So radical constructivism is reality is built in what we do and what we practice. But at the same time, we organize in what we do and practice. We organize our world around it so that it becomes central, and therefore it works. And reality takes shape in what we do. So in the way we do things, reality is enacted, but it must be linking to an independent reality, otherwise it wouldn't work for us. So reality is built in what we do and in what we practice, like the one person building a church and the other a house and a garden and a sun. They are both true, they are both rooted in reality, but because we have picked different realities, one helps us to build a church and the other helps us to build a village or a household or a personal house. They are both true, they both work, but it depends on the different people, different ways of picking elements out of reality, what we end up with. But in both cases we end up with real reality based on elements of an independent reality, but still constructed individually or in groups. I hope that makes sense. I will give you an example of ethnicity, and I have to apologize. I will always use anthropological examples because that's my background, but I feel most familiar. I had a PhD student, and she was looking at how ethnicity was constructed in our society. She looked at practices of medical doctors, and she looked at how doctors reacted or responded to patients that could have been seen as ethnic different because they had a different appearance, another color of skin, or a name that didn't sound so familiar in our society. And what she saw is that when a medical doctor spoke to a patient and that patient responded perfectly well to his questions and his advices, he would not look at that patient as ethnically different. He would not mention it, and we did this during an extensive qualitative study. But when there were problems in the communication between the doctor and the patient did have a slightly different appearance or a slightly different name, he would or she would then say, hey, there is a problem in our communication. It must be the problem the problem must be the different cultural background or the different ethnic background of the patient. And then the doctor would start to look for explanations in the communication differences in the ethnic background of that patient. This led to complex communication. It led to all kind of, and in a way the doctor made this patient in an alien, a person of a different culture, instead of a person that he should try to get to know on a personal basis. And what we saw is that the way he approached Dutch differently from potential ethnic different patients, he approached them differently, and that had implications for the way he advised treatment. And in the end, you could, based on these kind of distinctions the doctor made, you could actually see that it had implications for the medical, for the patients that were labeled with a different ethnic background, that they had more problems in the end than the Dutch. And that led to statistics in which it turned out that it is more difficult to treat people with an ethnic background than Dutch people. But the ethnic background came only into being when a doctor needed to explain different communication, and this person happened to have a different color of skin or a different name. So there was a process in which, a social process in which doctors started to understand this type of patient differently, reacted and responded differently, which then later led to different outcomes, and these outcomes were counted in hard statistics. And by making these hard statistics, we finally suddenly end up with a problematic category of people with a different ethnic background. So you could say that this process was a process of constructing an ethnic category that was problematic. And if you want to know more about this, you could always read my articles on this. It is far more precise. There was also a study by Van de Zwaard on Dutch happy babies. And it was interesting that the way to assess the health, and especially the emotional and social development of babies, was based on averages that were determined by looking at Dutch babies only. And when you look at Dutch babies and families of a particular group, you see that in the Netherlands we focus a lot on the abilities in children to learn to speak. We read to them, we sing to them, etc. But babies from a Caribbean, with a Caribbean background, very often the parents are focusing far more on the physical development. Babies walk much earlier, where the Dutch babies talk much earlier. Babies brought up in another culture might walk much earlier. But we would only measure, based on our ideas, we would only measure the talking. We wouldn't look at the walking so much. And so you ended up with a ethnic minority being often behind in terms of language. Where they were not behind wasn't looked at, but language was looked at because it was a Dutch clinic. And this, if you then start to count and compute and record all these things, you end up with the categories. You end up with a category of babies in ethnic minorities who are more often behind than the Dutch. And again, this is a creation, a construction of a group with problems. These are examples of constructivist approaches. And as you see, development of speech is important to us, development of physical skills is important in others. They are both rooted in an independent true reality, but because we organize our practice, in this case in the Happy Baby Clinic, differently, we create, in the way, because of organizing in that way, we create actually a group of behind babies in a particular ethnic minority. So that is the social or the radical constructivist. You know, how do we use real life things to organize reality, and what kind of implications does it have? We create ethnicity, we create a problematic group. And then the last paradigm that I would like to discuss with you today, or maybe not entirely the last, you'll see, is the paradigm of critical theory. This paradigm, again, like in the interpretivist, social constructivist, but also like in the radical constructivist approach, says, well, there is maybe an independent reality. We try to get all kind of knowledge about it. We organize our society around it, around the way we understand it. However, in our understanding, there are inbuilt notions of difference. In our understanding, there are all kind of scientific notions that explain differences. These differences are brought into society and start to play their own role. And so knowledge is linked to independent truth, but the way we interpret knowledge and the way we organize our society around that knowledge, then in that interpretation, in the way we respond to it, we build in all kind of differences that may lead to differences in social status. It may lead to differences in access to material and immaterial goods. And the knowledge claim itself is relativist. Everybody can do that. However, some ways of looking at reality have become to dominate other ways of looking at reality. And science is one way of looking at reality that claims to be objective, that is rooted indeed in knowledge about an independent reality that may be theoretically at least having truth. However, since a dominant paradigm will be dominant also in how to organize reality, it will overshadow the ideas of others. And in itself, that is already an inequality. But in the way scientists or others, religions, common people, look at reality, try to understand the phenomena, in those understandings there might be already inbuilt differences. And an example is the example of Laqueur. Laqueur shows how scientific knowledge about the human body is based on anatomic knowledge that we obtained some centuries ago when we were opening up cadavers from prisoners. We opened up the bodies and we tried to understand and we tried to obtain knowledge, anatomic knowledge and other types of knowledge about the body that was underlying our medical knowledge. What we saw was mostly male bodies because it was prisoners, and in those days the prisoners that were hanged were predominantly, or there was a majority of men. They opened up the male bodies and they looked, for instance, at the reproductive organs. They got an understanding on how they were organized, how they might work, how they, functioned, etc. And then much later, also female bodies, some centuries later, also female bodies became available. And when they were opened, and also looking again at reproductive organs, they saw that they looked very different. But because there was already a body of knowledge about the male body, female bodies became the different ones, the deviant ones. And that has been underlying, for instance, research in infertility that was automatically placed in the female body. The male body was functioning according to standards in this and this way, but the female body being deviant therefore became kind of automatically the focus of problems in infertility. So there's a lot of knowledge now about infertility in women's bodies. There is far less knowledge about infertility in male bodies. And when you look at the way in which we even up to date try to address infertilities in couples, it very often is about invasive procedures in the female body and far less in the male body. And critical theory is the theory that looks at two things: which versions of reality overshout and have become dominant, above others, and in this case scientific knowledge has become dominant over other types of knowledge in our society at least. But also they look also at what kind of inequalities are implied or reproduced in the knowledge that scientists have. So what kind of knowledge is dominant, but also what kind of relationships of inequality are represented in this type of knowledge. So critical theory is calling for participatory approaches to science, and that means that when you determine or define or formulate a research problem, you need to do so not only from a scientific point of view, but in dialogue also with the other partners, to avoid one paradigm or one approach, one map of and for a reality to overshout the others. The second approach, also within critical theory, is about empowerment. It's creating awareness in each of the ways in which we look at reality and look at the processes that lead to inequalities. So, for instance, by studying the work of Laqueur, we can see how this is underlying inequalities in the approach to infertility in couples. So, on the one hand, taking serious the fact that one paradigm or one approach to science, the scientific way of working with independent reality, shouldn't always dominate the others. We are relativists here. But also to see within each paradigm, in the scientific, but also in religious or common sense paradigms, what kind of trends and what kind of processes lead to inequalities within that particular approach. So 2 dimensions of critical theory. Examples, I already gave you the example of notions on the body in Europe. Another interesting example is the work by Emily Martin, and she has looked at medical handbooks, which are supposed to be scientific and neutral and objective. But if you look at the texts in which the differences, for instance again, between male and female bodies are discussed and the language being used, you see that in that language and in the way these bodily anatomic differences are portrayed indicate all kinds of inequalities. And a very simple example, for instance, is that when in some American medical handbooks, when talking about the male reproductive system, it's about sheer production of sperm, ongoing, never diminishing. Sperm is always, in very admiring positive terms, whereas when we talk about the female body, it is about waste and breaking down and deterioration of egg cells and so on. And the way in which we speak about the female body is in negative terms. The way we speak about the male body is in amazing, admiring terms. And according to her, this is one of the first layers of inequality, in which other layers of inequalities in American society between men and women are rooted. And these are what we call radical constructivist studies. So looking at science, looking at processes, looking at practices, and see how those practices, while not being untrue, they are still can lead to all kinds of different realities, different ways in which we organize our world, and different categories of people, different constructions, based on different constructions of reality. I already mentioned ethnic studies. I also already mentioned Van de Swaard. And Van de Swaard is not only a radical constructivist, but she also verges towards critical theory, because what she shows is that by using Dutch standards, based on Dutch culture and based on what we find important in the Netherlands, for instance language skills, by using those to judge or to assess the kids in cultures that have other priorities, we see that they stay behind in the Dutch criteria for development. And that means that we create a category of people with a problem. And then we assign that to the ethnic background of those problems. And so we have a category of Caribbean and Surinamese people whose kids are, because of Surinamese culture, always behind, and who therefore need special interventions, special policies to fix them. And that may lead to all kind of discussions by, for instance, our politicians like Wilders, who say, why are these people always bringing troubles? They cost us money. Let's kick them out. So these kind of theories, these kind of approaches try to show us how our society is rooted in not untrue, but particular takes on reality and particular ways in which we construct reality. So these paradigms, and if you read within these paradigms, they can help you also to shape your research question. So if you're a constructivist, if you want to work within the constructivist, radical or social constructivist paradigm, whether you want to work in the post-positivist, not the positivist, but in the post-positivist paradigm, or in the critical theory, or in the interpretive paradigm, that will determine very much the direction of your research question. And in addition to the theory that you read, or as a critique on the theory that you read, so you can use this also to sharpen and focus your research question and your problem statement. It is sometimes tricky because the paradigms are not always easy to distinguish. If you look at, for instance, Van der Zwaard's work is both critical as well as radical constructivist approaches, but it may help you to consider what you're doing. Am I going to be working within the post-positivist tradition? Do I want to stick to the epistemology and the methodology that is used in the post-positivist paradigm? Or am I a constructivist? And am I less interested in methodology, but more interested in opening up the trends that lead to inequality and see how that has evolved, and so on. So you could say that in the post and the positivist and the post-positivist tradition, with the most need to really see reality as it really is, we need strict methodologies. In the other paradigms, we are a bit more relativist, and therefore the methodology is still strict, but not as strict as in the positivist and the post-positivist paradigms. Then I would like to mention a sixth paradigm, although I didn't announce that, and I also didn't count it in the 5 that we discussed. And this is the people who are calling themselves pragmatists. They say, what do we care about all those philosophical, ontological, epistemological discussions among the different people, among people from the different paradigms, because there's scientific debates, especially in social scientists, because between the representatives of those 5 paradigms. Does it really matter? That debate will not finalize anytime soon, because the debate starts from different assumptions about the nature of reality and will always go on. So they say, pick whatever you think works best, is the nicest, is the most interesting, yields the most interesting innovative insight, and your methodology should be convincing your audience that your results are realistic. So it's about plausibility and not about a realistic, meaning referring to an independent, real, true, to finding the independent, real, true about an independent reality. Pragmatists are there too. They say, forget about all these discussions, do whatever you think is relevant and necessary, and pick from each of the paradigms what you think is nice. I didn't mention this because this is a rather new and not very popular, very often used approach. But all the first 5 that I did mention, you find very clear representatives of those in the debates, in the literature as well. So for your study, it is important that you not only look at the literature, but that is there about your study, but also to search your soul about how you are thinking about reality, ontology, epistemology, methodology, and to see which of those paradigms fits best with you, and look at theory that is written within your paradigm that comes close to your topic, because that might help you also to further operationalize your research questions. And as I already gave an example, for instance, when I was asked to do a study about how general practitioners deal with patients from ethnic backgrounds, and if in the way they deal with them, they generate differences even though they don't intend to. That would be a constructivist study, but you could also look at it from what is dominant. What is the culture of the patient, and how can the doctor understand the culture of the patient? And if the doctor understands the culture of the patient, he or she can communicate with that patient more effectively. In a study in which you assume that ethnic differences and cultural differences exist, are not constructed, but are really there, and you do a study on how to deal with those differences, that would be a post-positivist approach. But if you take a constructivist approach, you would ask the question like, is there in the interaction and the way the doctor does his work, does that lead to differences in which he experiences and deals with people that could be ethnically different compared to the Dutch? Does that impact the outcome of the success of his dealings with the patient? And if it does, that can be counted, and then you have a constructed social category. So you see how the different paradigms may differently focus your questions, even though the problem in itself, and that is that ethnic patients often feel less satisfied with the treatment of the GP. That could be the starting point. And so I came to an end of my talk about paradigms. I advise you to look at my slides more carefully, to read a little bit more, and if you're interested and you would like to refocus or focus your study a bit so it fits in one of the paradigms that I discussed today, please do so. It is worth trying, and it is worth the brain exercise and the brain gymnastics to try so. I hope you have a little bit of a more clear idea about what paradigms are about, and I wish you a lot of success and fun with thinking about this further in the next periods. Thank you, Anja.